Hi, Sean Haynes with Agri CFO and the Ag Center, giving you weekly commentary and ag markets here in California. Just wanted to say thanks again for taking the time to listen to what we have to say and take this information in, as well as give us feedback on what we are saying. I know these are kind of trying times and things are a little bit crazy in the world. Us and ag kind of deal with that on a regular basis as a way of life. I think a lot of you folks are kind of feeling what we've been feeling for the past 20 or 30 years now, as far as how things go for us. But we're all in the same boat together. And again, thanks again for listening. And let's get on to beef markets. Beef continues to stay high in the 250 range to 270 range out for the next 6 to 9 months, according to the LRP. Still, again, not a lot of cattle on the market. Beef marketing, i.e. beef actually hitting the retail shelves, is down 3% year over year, which kind of translates to how the cattle inventory being down about the same amount of months. Feed placements and feed yards are down as well. So it's continuing to increase demand for these beef on dairy crosses and these Holstein bull calves. Beef on dairy crosses, 625 to 635 this week. Holstein calves, about 325 to 350, which is kind of all-time highs. And even looking at the cost of feeding these animals that are marketed now, like being sold now at finished cattle that went into the chain about March of last year. Break even's about $1.67 based upon their purchase price and the feed that went into them, but still pretty good at $1.97, kind of coming out of the feed yards for animals placed now in March. So it's 30 cents increase in cost to raise those animals, even with a higher price per calf. But feed costs have come off, and some of those other overhead costs have come off as well. So it still looks profitable even at that range. The real big rub is going to be between feed yards and the processors. So processors that break even to a slight loss in the market. Consumers are kind of pushing back and not buying as much because the price point's been kind of painful for them. And the feed yards still are making about anywhere from $250 to $400 per head going out. So either the consumer is going to have to go ahead and increase what they're willing to pay for the beef, or the feed yards are going to have to decrease what they're wanting for these cattle coming out for the processors. So we'll see where that whole kind of standoff comes. Consumer trends still remain pretty good. Demand for beef is strong compared to what the supply and the price is. You look for pork and poultry usually kind of come into that space and fill it up, but you just really haven't seen the availability of those animals to fill their protein space, and they're seeing some stress as well. You've got Smithfield closing down 35 hog farms back east, and you've got Tyson closing another 4 processing plants because of unprofitability in those areas. So you kind of wonder what that's all about. So in the long run, on the beef side, it looks like a good long run for profitability unless something drastic happens. Pricing continues to stay good. Feed seems to continue to be coming off. And then, last but not least, we're just waiting to see what these retention numbers are going to look like in the fall, if guys are going to retain animals for heifer replacements and or culls. And so once we know that, we'll have a better picture what the availability is going to be coming into the next year. But if the availability is not there, we don't have an increase in the herd to put into placements one way or another, I'm expecting to see some consolidations in the feed yards as they can't fill them up and look to consolidate down to kind of save some overhead. So that's it for the bright and sunny beef markets here in California. Let's get on to dairy, which seems to be improving. Dairy prices continue to push up a little bit on strong cheese sales and butter sales relative to what's going on in the world. So for some reason, that's been picking up. I think there's a little bit of feeling there's some scarcity out there in the market as far as the amount of milk that's going to be available for sales. We're hearing some tightness in the cream markets back east all of a sudden, and even hearing some rumors of guys shipping way out of California to go to Michigan to kind of make some balance. So when you start seeing things like that, it usually signals that some of this heat that's come in across the United States, as well as this high beef price to increase culling rates, may have reduced the amount of animals milking, as well as the amount of milk per animal across the U.S. We'll have to see how that helps. In response, milk prices versus last month, moved up about $2-3 per hundredweight, depending where you're at. We're looking at $17.66 right now for July, and then all the way through the end of the year, things kind of popping up in the mid to high 18 range. Once they get into the mid to high 18 range, most guys in California that are good operators should be making money, especially when we see these kind of feed prices reset in September. Again, I keep talking about that, but they just continue to tumble. Milk cow hay saw my first order of that kind of fall below $300 per day for $290 a ton. And then we're looking at dry cow hay just shy of $200 a ton all of a sudden. Hulls at 110 to 120, depending where you're at in the valley here. That's way less than half of what it was last year. Soybeans coming off because the soybean quality report came out at the USDA last week, and then corn, because it's moisture in the Midwest, it's coming down below $5 a bushel, which is really helping with costs. So once all these contracts from last year kind of fiddle out and we kind of reset, we get these new crops in, we should have a much lower cost of feed, which is 70% of milk costs out of dairy, and with a higher milk price, couple that with this higher calf price they're getting for beef on dairy calves for 630 a head, and Holstein bull calves at 350 per head. I think we should be kind of out of the woods at least, or at least to the point where guys aren't bleeding anymore into the fall this year. I also see next year this heifer hole coming. I've been looking at some reports. Just look at the number of animals calving per 100 head. It usually runs about 55 to 49 heifers calving per 100 milk cows. It's fallen all the way down to 29. At the current moment. And so I look at that and say, there's probably enough heifers out there to continue to keep the same, maintain the herd size as is. But if we cull them down and shrink the herd size and the milk price comes up, I don't think there's going to be a response like normal to go ahead and expand the herd at a really rapid rate to chase that milk price with larger volumes. So I'm hoping that we get the recovering price, maybe have a reduction in the availability of heifers to kind of chase that price and get a little bit of a longer recovery next year for these guys. So that's my crystal ball, and we'll see if I'm right or not. I'm willing to take bets. Just don't report me to DraftKings or anything like that. Off the improving dairy markets here in California, let's look at the nut markets. We seem to be struggling a little bit right now with all these large crops coming in. Almonds continue to slide a little bit. They're down about a nickel, and blend is kind of getting to the 155 to 165 range for most guys. We're kind of getting to the point where this year's crop's not going to be a profitable one if guys are really putting the input costs in response. I'm hearing a lot of folks talk about not putting whole split sprays on and backing off their fertilizer programs and things like that. So we'll see how that affects crop quality and crop size. But it definitely is going to affect the fruiting wood from this year going into next year. That falling kind of almond price because of that large crop is expected. It's finally kind of impacting the pistachio markets. Pistachios fell below that $2 mark for the first time in a long time. People are looking for substitutes, right? And if I've got the ability to buy an almond for $1.50 or buy a pistachio for $2.30, I've got to bring the price of that pistachio down relative to the value of that almond to get it sold. So I think the almonds kind of pulling that market down as well. It makes me kind of worry about some of these folks that purchase these orchards at $50,000 or $60,000 an acre and are carrying debt on it, then maybe $1,500 or $1,600 of just total operating costs, right? And seeing the falling price on that nut kind of leads me to expect that some of those guys are going to see losses for the first time in a long time. Walnuts continue to kind of be in a bad spot. Chandler and Howard walnuts still moving up though in sales for this year's crop pre-sales and up another 10 cents this week. We still haven't got to they're profitable, but at the same time, it's not a disaster like it was last year as far as making 30% of your crop costs. We might be to the point where 60% of crop costs. Still a loss, but we'll have to see. China has experienced some flooding in their farming area. I'm not quite sure if that's going to affect their ability to harvest walnuts, the quality of walnuts coming out of there, but that might be a bright spot for us this year. We'll have to see if that kind of comes through. But in the long run, it just doesn't look really good for walnuts for this period of time, or almonds, and now pistachios as well. So we'll have to hope for a short crop on the almond side. A lot of folks think it's going to be a lot smaller than the objective estimate said. If it does, it might signal some higher prices, but we won't really know about that till December. So, and then last but not least, two things. We should be harvesting the next week or two, so you should be seeing a lot of dust in the valley here. They'll be sweeping nuts, hot and heavy. And then we're also seeing some stress in some of these input companies with the effect of just the price of these nuts and the cost of production. I think a lot of guys have really pulled back what they're farming these trees with, as well as other crops. And so you're seeing companies like Bayer and Conservis come out the past week or two and just having their earnings at 40 to 60% less than the prior year, and really looking at how they sell into this market. And I think you're going to see maybe a commoditization of these nuts versus where they were the really specialty crop in prior years, and guys are really looking at costs per ton and costs per acre, where they weren't quite following that as hard as in prior years. And I think that doesn't bode well for some of these input companies looking to get into this market or stay in the market. So that's a tough story for nuts here in California. Let's get on to crops. Still full swing for stone fruits. They've been remaining level in pricing, quality, and sizing. It's finally kind of coming up to the point where folks are really happy with the crop and exporting it all over the place. Really haven't seen much change in price there. Watermelons have come down a little bit this week because of the seasonal demand coming off for Labor Day. The buying pattern's kind of been there already, and pricing's come off. Sizing's been off a little bit, and talking to the guys in the field. So you're looking at 168 to 196 for a 24-inch bin, depending on how many watermelons are in there. Strawberries coming off of seasonal highs, coming down to about $15.50 for conventional, $21 for organic. Yeah, again, seasonal demand kind of pushes that price up. We're about 75% of the way through collecting that California crop. We'll kind of trail off into the fall and be done with it pretty soon. But peak was in July. It looks like crop size wise, we're down about 15% for last year because of those lost acreages due to the storms and other raining effects that we have. So let's see if the long-term effect of that is going to be on the market as well. Um, Silage in the field hasn't really changed for folks. We're looking at $65 standing for most markets, $62 standing, depending where you're at. Crop quality looks good. Head development, on these corn cobs, when you're looking at these crops, look good unless you were in some really hot areas when you're tasseled out. So I think you're gonna have a pretty good harvest season for corn this year with the soil moisture and the heat that we've had lately. Hay's been off a little bit. Just a lot of hay. Dairymen are really buying hand to mouth. We're seeing forage crops, down the $120, $130 per ton range for wheat, hay, and things like that. If you haven't sold yet, oat hay. I'm seeing milk cow hay fall below that $300 mark for the first time in a long time at $290, $295 in some recent sales for some good quality hay. And that's kind of pushing dry cow hay along with it. It's kind of falling sub $200, 180, 190, up to $200 for good quality dry cow hay, where last year was almost twice that much. So the hay markets, as these dairies are the primary users and continue to buy hand to mouth, have really been kind of hurt by that whole dairy price index. Almond hull prices, same thing. The dairymen aren't buying forward. They've got some expensive hulls from last year as a bad taste in their mouth. Really buying hand to mouth again because of cash flows, and that has dropped all the way down to about $105 to maybe 110 per ton north market, and plus $10 to $20 per ton as you head south and have less folks available to sell those almond hulls. So, in the long and short, crops look to be strong in California this year. We'll have to see with the tomato harvest that comes in the next 3 weeks to see what yields are happening. But from what I'm seeing, yields look good there. Price looks good at $150 a ton. Again, the risk I'm worried about is all those tomatoes hitting the processing plant at the same time and kind of going things up. And we're getting pushback from the processing plants now talking about the fact that, hey, if you're over the 60-ton contract limit we put in there, we're not going to be buying those tomatoes at the $150 price that we talked about before, but at a lesser price that we negotiate with you at the gate. So we'll have to see kind of where that ends up and how many folks actually fall into that boat. But that's usually a good indication that there's a good crop result out there in the fields. So crops continue to do well in California. We'll have to see where they all finish out for the year. And let's get into interest rates. Interest rates continue to move up this week. Short-term rates have been kind of flat in the 5.4 range for 30-day money. They're really moving up in the long-term range, about 0.1 to 0.2%, depending on what you look at for 10 to 30-year money, which makes me think the market thinks that rates are going to be higher for a longer period of time than they were before. Otherwise, you would see this rate curve kind of inverting even more. Mortgage rates continue to march up. We're looking at 7.5 on the average for most money. 7.3% for a 30-year mortgage is here in the United States. It's really pricing a lot of folks out of the market, and I think you're kind of seeing this destruction in demand in the real estate markets. Jumbos haven't really come up that much, 6.5, 6.6%, but the credit underwriting standards for those type of loans have kind of pushed up, where you're requiring more of a down payment and a higher credit score to qualify for those things. So I think you're going to continue to see banks restrict their lending a little bit through higher requirements because they don't have quite the amount of money they had before to lend out. And then higher quality loans mean they have to reserve less for them, and that then means they have more money to lend out at a cheaper price when they're looking at deposits as a source of funds. So we'll see how that plays out. But it looks like the Fed may have another quarter point to half point rise in them as the core inflation rate kind of popped up 0.2% a little bit this month, which is kind of a surprise. You'd expect hopefully to see it continue to decline if they're right. This pop-up's kind of a problem because now you get some wage inflation coming in with all these unions asking for large increases in wages, 46% for UAW, 20 to 30% for these pilots unions that just got approved. 20 to 30% for UPS, et cetera. And so folks are finally kind of coming into the employment range and saying, hey, look, I need to make more money for what I'm doing versus the amount of inflation I've suffered the past 3 years. And I think people are forgetting the fact that we've had 4.5% inflation or better for every month for the past consecutive 32 months. Even if you just join those together and don't multiply them on top of each other like you should, that's 13.5% inflation, right, over the past 3 years, which is a big bite in a lot of folks' ability to make ends meet. So we'll have to see how that kind of plays out. Jobs report, same thing. The jobs report continues to show there's jobs being generated, but when you look into those jobs and really dig into them, most of them are second jobs or underemployment, i.e. less than 40 hours a week. It really just aren't really new jobs or extra jobs. It just signals to me that people are hurting and not making enough money to kind of make ends meet in the market. So we'll have to see where that kind of plays out. The problem the Fed's going to have with these rate increases, right, is you want to destroy jobs a little bit to get the cash out of the market, but because the housing supply has been so tight, and now you've increased the price of the housing, which means you've decreased the ability for houses to get sold and kind of swapped around. Folks are sitting on a really cheap interest, really reticent to get out of that cheap interest to move into another house at a very high price historically, right? Or if even they can qualify. But the problem is if I as the Fed want to pull out of our next recession or get out of stagflation and increase the amount of activity in the market, I've got to drop rates. But if I drop rates and housing prices haven't fall, you've got all this extra equity in houses that's available to people all of a sudden at a very cheap interest rate, and they're going to access it and buy it. And then you've got this kind of resurgence in inflation that they worry about again. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Makes you think a lot about, like, does it make sense to have the Fed playing games like they are? And until we kind of get some destruction in equity and some slope off in employment, you're really not going to see the 2% that they want to see as far as core inflation goes. Again, we got to get down almost a half from where it's at now before they feel that the rate increases have done their job. So for the short term, rates look like they're going to stay where they're at, if not go up a quarter to a half point over time, and you're going to stay there for a little bit longer than most folks are thinking, i.e. not in 24, but maybe come down to 25. So that's all I've got for interest rates and markets right now. Thanks again for listening. Please like, follow, share, hit all those extra buttons that you normally do. We'd like to get some more followers on here, as well as just get some feedback on how well we're doing or not doing, and any other things that we'd like to follow as well. Hopefully in the next coming weeks, we'll have some stuff on vineyards here in California and the wine industry, as well as citrus and avocado markets to kind of give you some fuller rounding of what's going on here in California. There's 220 crops. We can't cover them all, but we would like to cover most of them. So again, any suggestions are welcome. And thanks again for listening.